Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are strapping in for a truly colossal exploration. We're going into a world of giants, crude jokes, and some surprisingly profound humanism.
We really are.
And what might be, and I'm not kidding, the single most philosophical discussion ever committed to paper about, well, about human hygiene.
It's an incredible text. This deep dive is based on a whole stack of sources that challenge us, really, to look past the surface level gags.
Yeah, the stuff everyone remember.
Exactly. To see the Renaissance Revolution that's hiding just beneath all that satire.
So we are diving deep into Francois Rabelais' masterpiece, Gargantua and Pantagruel.
Indeed. For so many people, the work is just synonymous with, scatology, drinking absurdity. It's this fountain of lowbrow humor.
Right. It was banned by censors, and it was probably cherished by students looking for dirty jokes.
And that reputation, it's really unfortunate because it's overshadowed the profound intellectual and philosophical foundation of the work.
So our mission today, really guided by the sources you've shared with us, is to reveal the doctor and the radical humanist who's behind all that humor.
Mhm.
We're going to be exploring Rabelais' central and, frankly, incredibly radical argument. And that is that the fundamental, messy, undeniable reality of the human body,
All of it.
all of it, the eating, the drinking, the sex, and yes, the excreting, that
Yeah.
it's not vulgarity, he says it's the absolutely essential, non-negotiable starting point for finding ultimate truth.
Exactly. Rabelais, and you have to remember he was a practicing physician. He constructs this whole world where physical reality, the complete functioning of the human organism is locked in this challenging, often hilarious dialectic with what he calls sacred language.
So, theological doctrine.
Right. He believed that the body was the only honest foundation upon which any true spiritual or intellectual understanding could actually be built.
Okay, let's unpack this then, because we really need to understand how Rabelais used the immense scale of his giants and, the sheer audacity of his gross-out humor to completely dismantle the intellectual framework of the medieval world.
It's quite a project.
It is. How did a book famous for its detailed investigation into the properties of a gosling's neck become a foundational text for modern humanism and this profound critique of intellectual dogma? To really get our heads around the colossal scope of Rabelais' work, we have to start not just with the man himself, but with the specific historical moment he was writing in.
Absolutely. Francois Rabelais was a French Renaissance writer born around 1494. And crucially, he lived many lives. He wasn't just a writer.
He wasn't.
He was a Franciscan monk at first, then he became a Benedictine, he studied law, and then finally, and this is so important, he became a respected doctor and anatomist.
That multifaceted background is just key, isn't it? Because it positioned him perfectly to critique every single major institution of his time.
It really did. He saw the church from the inside, so he knew its hypocrisy. He knew the rigid structure of the law. And, most importantly, as a doctor, he prioritized empirical observation.
Looking at the actual human body.
Looking at the body, yes, over some inherited abstract theory he was supposed to just accept.
He published Gargantua and Pantagruel in 5 volumes between roughly 1532 and 1564. And the work was just, it was dynamite.
It was an intellectual bomb thrown right into the heart of the very conservative, religiously controlled literary landscape of France.
I can imagine.
The sources make it really clear that the work was instantly controversial. And, pretty predictably, it was listed as a banned book by the Sorbonne and the church authorities.
Which is always a sign you're doing something right.
Well, it signals its profound impact. This text wasn't just, poking fun at society. It was a loud, joyous, and often very vulgar outcry from the emerging bourgeoisie.
So the new intellectual and commercial class.
Exactly. The heart of the Renaissance. It was their outcry against the decaying feudal structure and the sort of unquestioned, suffocating authority of the church.
Our sources describe it as a great humanitarian masterpiece. But we need to be clear about what humanism meant to Rabelais. It wasn't just about, being nice.
Not at all. It was about affirming humanity in its entirety. Its physical nature, its creativity, its joy, its drive for knowledge, all at a time when medieval asceticism, the denial of the body, still dominated the intellectual world.
Precisely. And to understand how radical Rabelais was, you have to understand what he was fighting against. The sources say he was lashing out at 2 primary targets.
Right. The first, and maybe the most obvious, was the widespread hypocrisy and, at times, the just sheer cruelty of the Catholic Church in the period leading up to the Reformation. But maybe even more foundational to his whole philosophical project was his attack on scholasticism.
Scholasticism. Now, that's a term we hear thrown around a lot. For anyone listening, what exactly was it, and why did Rabelais hate it so much?
So scholasticism was the dominant academic method of the Middle Ages, especially in powerful institutions like the Sorbonne in Paris. The key thing to understand is that it wasn't about empirical observation. It was a closed system.
A closed system built on what?
It was built primarily on reconciling classical philosophical texts, particularly Aristotle, with Christian theology. Their whole method was just dialectical debate over established authoritative texts.
So, if you had a question, you didn't go out and, look at the thing itself. You went to Aristotle, you went to the Bible, and you just endlessly debated the textual interpretation.
Correct. That's exactly it. Knowledge was acquired by analyzing ancient authorities, not by observing the world, and certainly not by observing the human body.
And the result of that kind of education?
The result was an education that was incredibly dry, abstract, focused on rigid categorization, and just utterly divorced from the messy realities of life, of medicine, of commerce, or human passion. Rabelais saw this as the scholastic education that, in his view, poisoned children's minds.
How so?
By prioritizing this arid memorization and abstraction over actual living experience.
Okay. So to carry this monumental critique of, a fossilized intellectual system, he needed some monumental figures.
He did.
And this is why he created Gargantua and his son, Pantagruel. These aren't just characters, are they? They're more like conceptual giants. They're designed to embody the new spirit of the Renaissance.
They really are. They're characterized by their immense strength, of course, but also their profound knowledge, their endless curiosity, and their astonishing generosity.
And they're peace-loving, right?
They're peace-loving, but they're also capable of these epic physical feats of consumption and battle when they need to be. Rabelais is using their sheer physical and intellectual scale as really a form of praise for this emerging enlightened class.
A class strong enough to break the old feudal order.
And broad-minded enough to embrace all this vast new knowledge that was being unlocked by exploration and the rediscovery of ancient texts.
And the style of the book itself mirrored this whole upheaval. The sources really highlight that the work deliberately rejected the affected, overly stylized, and rigid forms of aristocratic literature that were common at the time.
He injected this incredibly lively, fresh, and close-to-life air into the literary scene. It became something that we would probably describe as accessible to everyone.
So it was enjoyable for the elite scholar who could, get all the philosophical parodies.
Right, and also for the common person who just loved the sheer exuberance of it, the drinking songs, and of course the toilet humor.
So the satire, the humor, the sheer physicality of the giants, that's what made the book so revolutionary. It was declaring that philosophy didn't need to be pristine and wrapped in Latin and guarded by academics.
Exactly. It could be messy. It could be vital. It could be hilarious.
Yeah.
The style itself was the vehicle for Rabelais' new worldview. It was a declaration that the human, in all its messy, glorious complexity, was worthy of literature, worthy of philosophy, and worthy of celebration.
Yeah.
And this is where we pivot from the historical context to the philosophical core, specifically to what our sources call Rabelais' corporeal humanism.
Right.
For Rabelais, the physician, the physical body, and its raw operations, eating, drinking, defecating, having sex, these are treated not as sources of sin or shame, not at all. They are the philosophical high ground, the actual honest foundation of truth.
That's such a complete 180 from the medieval mandate, which was to, mortify the flesh, ignore the body to try and reach the divine spirit. Rabelais is saying, no, you have to acknowledge the flesh first in its most basic mundane details because that is unvarnished reality.
And let's look at the most famous and maybe the most audacious example of this body-first philosophy. It's what the sources call the metaphysics of excretion. This is the famous Gosling experiment detailed in Book 1, Chapter 13, how Gargantua invented a device to wipe his butt.
We're talking about a Renaissance giant, the central figure in a major work of world literature, spending an entire chapter on the logistics of wiping. It's almost like a piece of performance art.
It is, and the genius of it lies in the methodology. Gargantua, in his youth, becomes intensely dissatisfied with all the traditional methods. And the description of his experiment is Rabelais at his most mock-serious. He's mimicking the dry, hyperspecific logical argumentation of scholastic texts.
I remember the list of things he tries. It's just exhaustive.
It's a painstaking, almost scientific, and frankly disgusting investigation. He systematically tries everything available. Velvet masks, silk scarves, various plants, mallow,
Yeah.
cabbage, burdock leaves, dock leaves. He even recounts the pain and, the inefficiency of things like straw or hay or sand.
And his conclusion from all this.
His conclusion is that all the fine woven materials, the silks and velvets, are failures because they retain too much residue.
Wait, I have to stop you. Are you seriously suggesting that Rabelais' foundational philosophical text pivots on a detailed empirical investigation into personal hygiene? Isn't this just an elaborate, crude joke, and maybe we're just overreading it?
That is precisely the question Rabelais forces us to ask. And the sources argue very strongly that the answer is no, we are not overreading it. We are reading it correctly because the form is the philosophy. The crude joke is the delivery mechanism for the radical critique.
Okay, how so? How does that work?
By applying the incredibly serious, tedious, and hyperlogical analytical structure of scholastic debate, the very same method the medieval academics used to analyze, say, the number of angels that can dance on the head of a pin.
Right.
By applying that method to the lowest, most unavoidable physical function, Rabelais is demonstrating the utter failure of that abstract system.
He's saying, look, if you're so brilliant at abstract reasoning, why can't you solve the simplest, dirtiest, most practical problem of daily life?
Exactly. He is challenging the intellectual elite to ground their thought in reality and the scientific conclusion of this grand experiment.
The conclusion, after all that rigorous testing, is that the best, most satisfying tool is a well-furred gosling, specifically the downy feathers on its neck because of the pleasurable warming sensation.
This scene, the sources argue, represents a complete philosophical clearing of the slate. It's what one of our sources terms an ontological emptying.
An ontological emptying, wow.
It's a direct, hilarious, and visceral satire. Scholasticism relied on pure, abstract thought, totally detached from the consequences of living in a human body. Rabelais essentially says, you spend your lives debating theology, yet you cannot efficiently handle the most basic, unavoidable human reality, your own waste.
So the argument is actually profound. Truth must begin by honestly facing the body's unavoidable physical end products. If your philosophy can't accommodate reality, it's useless, and arguably you're not truly enlightened.
It's enlightenment achieved from the bottom up, literally. You cannot ascend to the lofty heights of spiritual or philosophical truth until you have fully acknowledged and, in a way, mastered the physical ground level. The body, which the medieval mind treated as an obstacle to be overcome, becomes the actual yardstick of truth for Rabelais.
That is such a powerful reframing of the relationship between flesh and spirit. And Rabelais doesn't just stop at the exit point. He also tackles the entry point, the mouth, but on this cosmic scale.
He does.
This brings us to that famous scene in Book 2, Chapter 32, where the narrator, Alcofribas, physically enters Pantagruel's mouth.
This is one of the most brilliant literary manifestations of the Renaissance concept of the microcosm and the macrocosm. Alcofribas, he's seeking refuge from a rain shower, so he ducks into the giant's mouth, and instead of finding, a throat leading quickly to digestion, he finds an infinite world.
The sheer descriptive detail here is so crucial. Alcofribas walks for days inside this mouth. He finds entire climates, forests, cities, a whole civilization. There are local residents living between the giant's teeth, just going about their normal lives. It's not just a large mouth, it's universe.
And this unveils Rabelais' view of what our sources call fractal geometry, the idea that the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, the body, are homologous. They're structured in the same way, endlessly containing complexity within complexity.
So the body is emphatically not a sealed finite container that you have to reject or escape from.
No, it's an infinite physical space that contains the entirety of the world. This completely validates the importance of the physical body as a complete infinite site for exploration and for truth.
And the fact that Rabelais was a doctor, that he performed dissections and he understood human anatomy, that really shines through here. He saw the human body not as a spiritual cage, but as this elegant, complex mechanism that interacts with, devours, and processes the outside world on a scale that mimics the universe itself.
Now, we have to connect the scale of these giants to the historical context of the Renaissance itself. And the sources introduce a very cold, almost unsettling observation here. The greatness of the giants, their size, their consumption, their boundless curiosity, it's not purely a celebration. It carries an underlying anxiety.
An anxiety related to the very thing the Renaissance celebrated most, which was knowledge.
Precisely. Pantagruel's name itself is related to the word thirst, and he was born during a great drought. The giant's sheer scale and their unquenchable thirst for experience and for learning reflect a deeper cultural phenomenon of the Renaissance, the sudden overwhelming flood of new knowledge and new information.
We often forget how shocking the mid-16th century must have been for people. You have the printing press making ancient texts accessible to more people than ever before. You have Copernicus challenging the entire cosmos. You have the discovery of the New World completely shattering the known map.
Suddenly, the Western world had access to more information, more history, more competing philosophies than ever before in its history. And Rabelais, the scholar, saw this expansion not just as joyous liberation, but as something potentially unsustainable.
You mean too much information?
Yes. The sources refer to this as the fear of information overload, or even a pathological craving.
A pathological craving. That suggests a sickness, doesn't it? Like a cancerous expansion, as one of the sources describes it. So the sheer capacity of the giant becomes a metaphor for a kind of intellectual gluttony.
I think so. If the human mind suddenly has access to infinite knowledge, how can it possibly process it? How can it keep from merely collecting dead fragments of information without ever synthesizing them into actual wisdom?
So the giant scale is a double-edged metaphor.
Exactly. It embodies the intellectual triumph of the Renaissance, but it also reflects the existential burden of realizing that the world, and the knowledge within it, is just too vast for any single human to fully grasp or safely contain.
So the body's infinite capacity, which is mirrored in Cantergril's vast internal world, is both a marvel of creation and a source of this profound, unsettling anxiety about the limits of human comprehension. Rabelais is using the body to explore the fear that the Renaissance intellectual might simply choke on all the new information. So we've established that for Rabelais, the body is the necessary foundation. It's the honest starting point of truth. Now we have to move to the other side of his dialectic. How does he apply this corporeal humanism to the language of ultimate truth? Scripture, doctrine, revelation. If the body is alive and messy and real, what happens when the language of the divine is dead and tidy and abstract?
This is where we transition from, say, the digestive tract to the acoustic space. And it reveals how Rabelais challenges theological authority. He achieves this through one of the most conceptually brilliant passages in all of literature, the idea of frozen words, or paroles gelées.
I find this concept of language having a physical, material state so fascinating, especially for the 16th century. Can you walk us through the scene in detail?
Of course. It occurs in Book 4, chapters 55 and 56. Pantagruel and his crew are on a sea voyage, sailing in the far north, through icy waters near the borders of the frozen sea. And suddenly, they start to hear these strange, chaotic sounds.
What kind of sounds?
They hear the yelling of men, the distinct neighing of horses, and the unmistakable clang of weapons clashing. But the air is cold and silent. There's nothing to see, yet these sounds keep drifting in.
So it's a sound without a visible source. It's like a ghostly auditory experience, like a battle from the past is just hovering around them.
Exactly, and they are utterly confused. They're convinced they're sailing near some kind of realm of spirits. But the captain, Episton, explains what's happening. He says they are hearing the sounds of fierce battle that took place there the previous year.
And the sounds were...
What? They were literally frozen solid in the cold, frigid air. The intense cold had immobilized the sound waves, trapping them as solid acoustic matter, almost like chunks of colored ice.
So sound, which we think of as this ephemeral, passing thing, became physical matter.
Yes, and Pantagruel, being Pantagruel, is utterly delighted by this discovery. He starts gathering handfuls of these solid, icy words, and he tosses some onto the deck of the ship. Initially, they are mute and colored. Some look like small, multicolored pieces of rock.
And as they hit the warm deck of the ship, they start to thaw.
They start to melt, releasing their trapped energy. And this allows the crew to finally hear the actual conversation, the specific words, the shouts, and the clamor of the fight that happened a year prior.
The philosophical insight there is just profound, and this is where the language discussion really deepens, isn't it?
It is. Rabelais is exploring the concept that language, especially when it's separated from its immediate vital context or from the warm breath of the original speaker, becomes dead. It becomes frozen matter.
So things like theological doctrine or rigid laws or decrees that are codified and solidified?
Exactly. When that happens, language loses its essential function as communication and vital exchange.
It's the ultimate deconstruction of dogma. When you take the dynamic, living word of a prophet or a legislator and you fossilize it into this rigid, unchangeable law, you turn it into a cold, brittle fragment of ice. This is Rabelais' direct shot at the Latin Mass, isn't it? At the unchangeable textual authority of the medieval church.
Think about it from the perspective of the common person in the 16th century. They couldn't read Latin scripture.
Yeah.
They only ever heard these frozen fragments dictated from a distant, inaccessible past. Rabelais is implying that it's only through the warmth of humanist understanding, through active, living human experience and critical engagement,
Yeah.
that language can regain its original vital function of communication and revelation.
It raises such a crucial, pressing question for Rabelais' contemporaries, and honestly for us today, too.
Yeah.
Are the laws, the scriptures, and the doctrines that govern our lives just cold fragments left behind by people who came before?
Right.
Fragments that need to be actively thawed, interpreted, and recontextualized by living, breathing, eating people? Or are we just supposed to follow the static noise?
The frozen word scene really encapsulates Rabelais' entire project regarding sacred language. He's arguing that language must be vital, dynamic, and corporeal. If it can be frozen and thawed, it is physical, and therefore it's subject to the laws of physical reality, the very same reality that he established back in Section 2 with the Gosling experiment.
And this amazing insight that language has a materiality that can freeze and thaw, it sets the stage for the final synthesis of the body in the word, which is the culmination of the giant's entire quest.
It is. The entire 5-volume journey, which is essentially an allegorical quest for wisdom, culminates in the search for the ultimate revelation. And that is found through the oracle of the divine bottle, the Daivute.
So the crew in Pantagruel, they travel across vast oceans, they face bizarre monsters, they debate every philosophical school known to man, all to hear this final definitive answer. After all the adventures, the satires, the philosophical debates, and the literal consumption of worlds, they finally arrive at the source of divine truth. What is the grand, complex theological revelation that's delivered to these weary travelers?
The final oracle, delivered in Book 5, Chapter 45, is deceptively simple, but it perfectly synthesizes Rabelais' entire philosophy, uniting the physical and the spiritual.
Yeah.
The oracle speaks one single word in an ancient language: drink, drink.
Just drink. That's it. The answer to the meaning of life, the universe, and everything is a single active verb related to consumption.
Precisely. The simplicity is the profundity. This one word is simultaneously completely physical and utterly divine. It's physical because it refers to the necessary, vital, corporeal act of drinking, of swallowing, of embracing sensation, the very life force Rabelais celebrated.
And it's divine because...
It's divine because it is the ultimate, sought-after revelation. It's the final word on the nature of life and truth.
So Rabelais is arguing that the deepest theological and philosophical questions are not solved by abstract syllogisms or frozen texts. They're solved by a physical action that affirms the body's reality and its immediate engagement with the world.
Exactly. It's the complete rejection of arid, abstract, purely intellectual debates. It is the final word arguing that true spiritual understanding is found in the physical, living, present experience. The command, drink, is the perfect unity of body and spirit. You engage, you consume, you live, you experience, and that is revelation. The act of fully living, of accepting the physical reality that sustains you, is the highest form of sacred language that Rabelais could possibly imagine.
So Rabelais isn't just a critic, he also offers an ideal. He tries to show what a society would look like if it successfully integrated this corporeal humanism, the truth of the flesh, with the thawed, vital, sacred language.
He does. He does this through his description of the Abbey of Theleme, which is the utopian community he details in Book 1, Chapter 57.
The Abbey of Theleme is the ultimate counter-institution, isn't it? If the medieval monastery was a place of, isolation, denial, and ascetic discipline, Theleme is a place of affirmation, beauty, and physical joy.
It reverses every single traditional monastic rule. Traditional monasteries enforce rules of obedience, celibacy, and poverty. Theleme explicitly encourages wealth, beautiful clothing, the free mixing of men and women, and total personal liberty.
And the core of this whole counterstructure is its sole legendary rule, the famous slogan, "Do what thou wilt, face ce que voudras." At face value, it sounds like the ultimate expression of radical freedom, like a blueprint for complete societal liberalism.
It sounds like complete joyful anarchy, a total release of physical and moral inhibition, which, given Rabelais' celebration of the body, seems logical.
Right. But this is where we have to introduce the crucial paradox, which the sources really highlight through historical and textual analysis. While that rule sounds universally liberating, Rabelais makes it explicitly clear that this utopian design was, and this is a quote, extremely elite and exclusive.
Exclusive in what specific sense? Was it based on money or something like that?
No, it was based on inherent character and education, only those of noble birth, which, for Rabelais meant having an innately good, high-minded nature, and those who were well-educated were admitted.
Okay, so the people living there were already people whose bodies were healthy, functioning, and cared for, and whose minds were civilized and disciplined through this new Renaissance learning.
Right, so Rabelais wasn't proposing freedom for everyone. He was proposing a freedom that had to be earned and was only sustainable by a highly refined, self-governing individual. That feels, I don't know, inherently contradictory to the broad humanism he seemed to champion. How do the sources reconcile that exclusivity?
They reconcile it by noting that this freedom is what they call an expensive instinct. True freedom for Rabelais is built upon the synthesis we've been discussing this whole time. The inhabitants of Thelem, they already possess physical harmony. They have healthy, functioning bodies that accept reality, like eating and excreting.
The Gosling.
The Gosling. And that's combined with language refinement, a civilized, disciplined mind that can process the world's vast knowledge without falling prey to dogma or that information overload we talked about.
Ah, I see the connection back to the scholastic critique. If you simply unleash the common, undisciplined, or poorly educated person with the rule, do what thou wilt, they will most likely fall back into ignorance or chaos, which would then require external authority and rigid rules to maintain order.
Precisely. Rabelais recognized that the freedom to act according to one's will, to truly live according to your own inner law, requires both intense physical honesty and immense cultural discipline. His utopia, therefore, is not some naive vision of liberation for the masses. It's a highly calibrated ideal for the Renaissance individual who has successfully internalized the lessons of corporeal humanism and has mastered the daunting intellectual challenges of the age.
So it's the ultimate vision of self-mastery. You must first acknowledge the Gosling, then you must learn to saw the frozen words, and only then do you earn the right to say, do what thou wilt. It's a powerful critique of both medieval asceticism and simple, unchecked hedonism.
Exactly. It demands discipline, but the discipline is self-imposed, not dictated by some external authority. Rabelais provided the most vibrant, living counterbalance imaginable to the repressive asceticism of the Middle Ages.
And his work's power comes from using that satirical, often crude, and wildly accessible style as a vehicle for the most serious philosophy.
It was, as the sources defined it earlier, literature that could be enjoyed by both the elite scholar and the common person.
So what does this colossal journey mean for the legacy of Rabelais at the end of the day?
He argues that true knowledge is a comprehensive pursuit. It requires you to stop pretending to be a pure, disembodied intellect, a mistake made by the scholastics, and instead admit that the human is a complete messy package, a laughing, eating, excreting political animal, as one source puts it.
It's all part of the deal.
It's all part of the deal, and only when you acknowledge the full breadth of physical reality can you truly begin to face the infinite cosmos with wisdom, with discipline, and crucially, with a sense of pure delight and ecstasy. The body provides the foundational truth, and the thawed, vital language connects that truth to the divine, compelling us always to drink and to live fully.
It's the ultimate permission slip to be human, messiness and all, provided you put in the hard work of being critically and physically engaged with the world. We've traveled across a vast philosophical landscape today. From a detailed mock scientific joke about the most effective material for hygiene, the Gosling and its pretty profound philosophical significance, to a deep critique of intellectual dogma revealed by the thawing of frozen words, culminating in that single divine command, drink.
Rabelais' radical synthesis of the physical body and the spiritual language led to his ideal of acting according to one's will. But we now understand that this will must be deeply grounded in physical honesty, intellectual culture, and personal refinement. It is a costly, disciplined form of freedom, only granted after the self-mastery of the giant.
And we discussed how Pantagruel's giant size reflects not just Renaissance confidence, but a kind of pathological hunger for knowledge, a historical fear of information overload caused by the vastness of newly discovered texts flooding the market thanks to the printing press. This expansion, Rabelais feared, could be a sickness as much as a celebration.
And this brings us to a final provocative thought for you, the listener. We live in a world where digital content is effectively infinite, it's constantly updated, and it far, far surpasses the information flood that Rabelais experienced in the 16th century. Our challenge is no longer a scarcity of knowledge, but a tidal wave of it.
So if Rabelais' giants were overwhelmed by the new discoveries of their time, are we, the modern learners, living inside Pantagruel's mouth? Are we simultaneously overwhelmed and yet endlessly enthralled by the sheer unmanageable scale of the world's knowledge?
And if we are indeed trapped in this digital abundance, endlessly scrolling through these frozen fragments of information and opinions, what is our divine bottle? What is our modern oracle demanding that we drink to cut through this constant digital noise and achieve genuine wisdom? Is it a command to log off? To engage physically? Or perhaps just to truly savor the single vital moment?
Something to mull over as you seek your own wisdom and navigate your own mountain of information. Thank you for sharing your sources with us and for diving deep into the monumental, messy, and marvelously human world of Rabelais.
Until next time.